Since the code doesn't have any tests, we'll start with writing an integration test for the post repository. It's easier to write an integration test for a codebase that doesn't already have a test suite or isn't written in a way that's testable. The reason I chose an integration test for the post repository versus a unit test is the way the code is currently structured, it's not very easy to write a unit test for. Secondly, for functionality that interacts with a database or a cache or some external system, it's a lot more reliable to test our code against a running database or a cache instead of using a fake implementation. Coincidentally, this is also one of the philosophies of testing, which is don't mock what you don't own. I've gone ahead and created a post.test.js file within the repositories directory of our test directory to mimic the hierarchy of our source. Like before, I'll bring in expect from chai. I'll bring in the post repository, which is the system under test. And finally, some test helpers that I've written to help working with the database, seeding it and deleting data as we go. Describe post repository. And let's say we want to test the find by ID method. It should return a post given a valid ID. That's a pretty good description, I'd say. In order for us to actually find a post, we need some data in the database. So I'm going to use test helpers to create some seed data. I have a function that I've created that will seed some records for us. Before I do that, I do need to bring in our database though. So let me go ahead and bring that in. The table that we want to seed is the posts table, and the data that I want to seed is, let's say the title, much like before, is my first blog post, and the body will be my first blog post. No, that sounds boring. Let's do something else. I'm writing an integration test. And finally, we need an author. So that means I need a user to exist in the database. I'm going to say user.id. And let's go ahead and create that as well. Table is users, and the data is the name. I'm just going to go ahead and say John Doe. Email is john@example.com. These do return promises, so I can await both of these calls. The seed helper method actually returns an array of results depending on the query. It is an insert, so I'm just going to call this results and save user as the first one out of those results object. Finally, I can actually make a call to post repository. So the thing I want to test is post repository.findById and 1. It's 1 because I know for a fact that there's only one record in the database. And let's save that to post. Finally, we can assert on our expectations, and we can say, I want to expect that my post.title equals my first blog post, and the post.body equal I'm writing an integration test, exclamation point. All right, so let's run the test and see what happens. It looks like I am overriding some values already existing in the database. A rule of thumb while writing tests is that they should clean up after themselves, and tests should not rely on outputs of tests that came before it. So in order for us to do that, we're actually going to use the before each hook of Mocha to clear out the database so that we always work with an empty slate. The database helper that I have here actually has a truncate method that I can use. We'll truncate the posts table and we can truncate the users table. This should fix that error. Great, it does. So right off the bat, you notice how we didn't need a web server to test this functionality. Going to the REST API client like Postman or curl, construct the body and test through all of the different layers of our application. All of the code to find a post in the database can be tested in isolation. This keeps the test suite fast as we add more and more tests. And so if tests are fast and easy to write, we tend to write more of them, which is great.